I really picked a difficult character to talk about when it comes to YouTube guidelines. A character that barely wears clothes half the time and is always toting guns. A little bit iffy. So if there's some images that are weirdly censored, that's exactly why. Rebecca, for me, and probably a lot of you, is one of the best characters within Cyberpunk Edgerunners. So much so that I rarely go back and talk about specific components within stories. I probably should do it a little bit more often, but I felt like it was necessary for this character. And there's one thing that really sparked this conversation for myself. Right? If you didn't know, Cyberpunk Edgerunners is developed by two different teams. Story is handled by CD Projekt Red, who created the game obviously, and it's in collaboration with an animation studio known as Studio Trigger, who are very proficient in doing these chaotic style of stories. This collaboration is beautiful, but Rebecca was not part of the original story. She was a character that was later introduced by Studio Trigger because they thought that she would make a great addition to the cast of characters and really stand out on her own. At first, supposedly, she wasn't necessarily accepted because of the imagery surrounding her and even the quirky upbeat personality that she has, which is very somewhat distracting. But seeing her meld with the cast of characters and the idea coming to life a little bit more with designs, it worked. And arguably the best addition to the story in itself. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Honestly, the complete opposite of what they thought was going to happen in terms of her being distracting. Instead, it hid a lot of the important narrative points that Cyberpunk Edgerunners was actually going for. And for this instant alone, she is the GOAT. She is the greatest element and kind of surprise for this story in a nutshell. Because of this harsh reality, there is a non-essential factor for Rebecca as a character, meaning that she does not play into the story whatsoever. You could take her out and the story would function the exact same way. So what does she actually do for us? Emotionally, she is the most vibrant individual within this story, the most chaotic, the most identifiable, and I would argue the most memorable. If you were to ask people who they remember from the story, even if they couldn't give names, they would probably remember Rebecca being this over-the-top, gun-toting, very loud individual that was quirky. Her appearance helps with this, her personality helps with this, and it does a lot for us as viewers to closely connect to that. A big reason why you love her is specifically because the story itself is pretty grim, it's dark. The genre that is cyberpunk and the idea of Night City in itself is depressing. It has this sense of dread that is so normalized so often that even if you know the ending of the story is going to be misery and death and destruction, really not give you some sort of finalized conclusion, quote unquote, that a goal may never actually be reached or achieved, having a bright point within there to balance it out stands out a lot. And that is exactly what Rebecca does and what she functions as. What's even more impressive about her character and why for me she's considered the GOAT of this story is that she hides everything. Because she is so vibrant, because she kind of eclipses over everyone else, she hides some of the most obvious narrative techniques that are going forward within the story as a secondary character. See, the progression of Cyberpunk Edgerunners is very straightforward. It's pretty simple. And honestly, if you think and look at it for more than 10 minutes, you'll probably see the fate that David Martinez would have and a lot of other characters, just taking into consideration the world, the idea itself, the genre, and what the story is trying to do. In the back of your mind, you probably came to the conclusion yourself that this isn't going to end well. Especially when you get to the halfway point of the story, you know it starts to degrade and people start to drop off like flies. What helps hide this fact, so you're not constantly thinking about it, so you're not constantly disappointing yourself potentially because, oh, you called it, is Rebecca. See, she comes into the story as being this vibrant individual that distracts you purposefully. Now, narratively, that probably wasn't the intention, considering she never existed with the prior cast, but adding her with this type of attitude and this alluring nature that surrounds her being extremely identifiable, she stands out on her own and completely, effortlessly, a lot of the times, steals the scene, perfectly blinds you from the story, what you're potentially thinking about, and instead you're fully focused on her. This is a ridiculously powerful tool to have. She may just be a secondary character, but she is aiding the story directly by drawing attention to her and away from all the theory crafting that you may be doing. A way that this is handled really well with her character is by emotionally connecting her to David. These two never really have a fling. There is some sort of connection between them. She does have some sort of feelings, and you could argue that David treats her as like a best friend, but they never build into that next stage of a relationship. They get closer, they get more comfortable, and you can see it more obviously in the later half of the season with how closely they're connected when Lucy kind of backsteps out of the story to handle her own past and trauma, Rebecca fills that void, emotionally, contextually, but also thematically. And that's when you start to see kind of the truer nature of what Rebecca is and how she feels towards David and this whole situation in itself. So you could imagine kind of the torment that would have gone through her watching the person that she potentially is currently building feelings for slowly lose themselves to Night City and to this fantasy, which is what the genre encompasses to begin with. But I think one of the best approaches they took in response to this is that Rebecca didn't try to detour David. She didn't try to change his opinion or forcefully stop him from doing what he was doing. Instead, she embodied it. She matched his energy. She is quite literally ride or die, and that is exactly what happened. She kept up with him till the very end, even while David was going through these massive transformations, even while he was pushing himself to the limit. She was the one that was personally handling every single thing, taking on a burden, if you will, making sure that he was taking the immunoboosters to keep him somewhat sane for a period of time so she could deliver him to Lucy. She's the chariot but also the horse, delivering David till as far as she can go. Something super impressive about how she comes to an end is basically the way she was introduced. She doesn't change randomly or have this sudden urge to confess how she feels or to express any sort of feelings or gratitude or thankfulness, whatever it may be. Instead, she goes out the exact same way that she has always been, the foul-mouthed, gun-blazing type of woman that she is. Even within the face of death and Adam Smasher, it is nothing new to her. However, her action is to buy David the tiniest bit amount of time, and while it's insufficient and doesn't really work, that was her last swing. In the end, she died fighting for David, fighting for Lucy, fighting for the people that she cared about. And she was the type of person to never deeply express it emotionally with words. It was always within action or how she treated her friends. For someone that was not originally meant to be a part of the story, for someone that is a secondary character, the sheer amount of influence that she has for this story to function, to work, to completely distract us from the nature of the story itself and where it's actually heading towards is absolutely incredible. This collaboration between CD and Studio Trigger creating this individual and making her work within the story, they created a gemstone. It's hard to think of Cyberpunk Edgerunners without Rebecca, without the life that she brings within the story. And I'm very happy that they decided to keep her around. Happy they played upon her even more, because they easily could have killed her off very early within the story, but they obviously crafted a vision for her character, and while it could have been fleshed out more if she was there from the beginning, what she was able to apply to the story, the impact that she had just being a secondary character technically, is nothing short of impressive. There's a ton of value that each character in Edgerunners provides, and they all have their own unique version of it, but Rebecca is easily the most iconic, the most recognizable, the most consistent, even though she's kind of sprinkled in early on within the beginning and then rapidly raised up to be such a fulfilling character by the end of it. Even if you could provide more dialogue, even if you could show more emotionally how she feels about things, or even a bit of her past or backstory, what she was able to achieve within such a short amount of time, being a secondhand consideration, continues to impress me the more that I think about it. I would love for them to kind of fill in the blanks for her a little bit more, basically adopting her character fully and filling in the blanks elsewhere, whether it be an information dump or even something within the game, for example, where you can find out more about her past, maybe the impact that she left, or just anything, really. In conclusion, Rebecca may just seem like the fun, lovable side character that becomes very important over time, but she is endlessly valuable for the narrative to succeed the way it does, to distract you, to keep your attention elsewhere, to be used as a blinding factor so you're not deeply focused on where the story is actually going. But she also serves as a breather, a breath of fresh air, a fun time away from the dread and grimace of Night City in the cyberpunk genre, away from the spiral of David, away from the trauma confronting Lucy, or the snarkiness of Kiwi, or the self-destruction of Maine. She gives us as viewers a sense of comfort, a sense of relief, but it's also double-backed and used for David. The exact same way that we see Rebecca is how Rebecca was utilized to help David. In the end, Rebecca went out the way that she lived, with that fiery attitude that we all know and love. But here's something that's a bit more food for thought. She is the only character that is a guiding hand. And what I mean by this is that pretty much the main cast, David, Maine, and Lucy, all follow the lone traveler. Within cyberpunk terms, this is basically a one-way trip to death, with no surroundings, no detouring, no turning back. It is only moving forward, and usually this is tragedy driven. It ends in death, and that is it. This is shown quite literally to you with Maine, as he's running across across the desert road with no end in sight. But when he does reach an end, it's nothing. It's just the end of the road. And it's meant to be anticlimactic. Similar to David as well, with how high he actually achieves going up to the top of Night City, but that is all that he could ever achieve. Reaching that height and then plummeting back down to earth. Rebecca within this story is not that. She's always seen with other people. She always plays as a pair or a duo, and that is her strength. She's a guiding hand or a guiding light, meant to aid people within their assistance on this lonely journey. And because of this, the emotional context that you gain for her, that she gives to other people, is beautiful. It's brilliant, and it's something that you can fall in love with over and over again and wholeheartedly appreciate. That's why for a lot of you, Rebecca is going to be your favorite character, and why I personally consider her the GOAT. If you've made it this far, thank you, and would like to see me talk about any other characters from Edgerunners, Lucy, David, Maine, Dorio, Kiwi, etc. from a different perspective, potentially, do let me know. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for watching.